August 23, 2023, a day when India's Chandrayaan-3 spacecraft made history by becoming the first to touch down on the lunar South Pole, a place we can't normally see from Earth. What makes this lunar hideaway so fascinating to scientists? Well, it turns out it's hiding something precious – lunar ice. This place is believed to be more abundant with this ice than what we found up north. And it's not hard to see why scientists are so buzzed up about it. It's a frozen water source, and it could become our key to building a permanent lunar home, or even fueling missions all the way to Mars. Scientists knew about this ice for over 2 decades, since the NASA spacecraft accidentally stumbled upon it during one of the missions. Then in 2018, NASA triumphantly declared that they're 100% sure about it. They said that the south pole of the moon is abundant with water. Now picture this. Future lunar settlers could tap into this water supply. It could help us sustain life in the barren lunar landscape. Plus, by cleverly splitting the water into oxygen and hydrogen, we could receive both air and rocket fuel. All this will make moon missions more feasible and self-sustaining. It's also a great glimpse into the past. This ice, maybe as old as the moon itself, could unlock the moon's and Earth's deep mysteries. But it turns out that water isn't rare in space at all. There might be lots of planets out there where life could thrive. We know this because we started finding water vapor around stars, and this water is remarkably similar to the water in our own solar system. This discovery suggests that the water on Earth originally came from space. Water forms around stars in the cloud of extremely hot vapor. Then it turns into ice and sticks to tiny dust particles. These particles stick together over time and become bigger objects, like comets, planets, and other things. Some of these become comets and planets in our own solar system. And this is how water is being spread across the universe, and it may be how it got to our planet and the moon too. Scientists think that the lunar ice might have journeyed here eons ago. Maybe it hitched a ride on water-rich asteroids that smacked into the moon's surface. All this has big implications for us. The southern pole is an ideal canvas for humanity to establish a real moon base. Imagine brick domes connected by secret underground tunnels. They'll be bustling with people busily operating computers. Some others will be cruising the lunar landscape in their jeeps or on their way to mine precious resources. We have some pretty cool ideas on how to build this. First, you probably imagine hauling hefty and water-draining shelters all the way from Earth. But maybe there's a more effective way. Think about our history as a civilization. Every time we ventured to a new place, we surveyed the surroundings for available resources and used them to survive and thrive. This is how we spread across our own planet. So why shouldn't we spread across the moon the same way? Now, you might wonder what resources the moon might offer. We know about the ice, and it can be turned into water. But we can clearly see that our planet lacks lush greenery and edible food. Well, it might not be obvious, but the moon does have something to offer – mineral resources and sunlight. Unlike Earth, where the sun rises and sets, the lunar poles offer quite a beautiful sight. The sun gracefully orbits the horizon the entire day, which means it can provide an almost uninterrupted source of power. Imagine living in a world bathed in perpetual sunlight. I'm sure the solar panels will love it. Me? Not so much. Still, we could use not only the sun's light, but also its heat. Honestly, we should just use everything. If we're left with spare metal while producing oxygen, find a purpose for that metal too. We need to treat the environment responsibly, not only on Earth, but on the moon as well. Which is why scientists are learning how to turn the moon's most abundant resources, regolith, into sturdy bricks. They've been quite inventive in figuring out how to create moon bricks. Scientists want to use the sun's heat to melt lunar dust, layer by layer, essentially creating a 3D printer for moon dust. Engineers have also cooked up bricks using solar ovens and zapped lunar soil with microwaves. They become quite adept at it. So yeah, Perhaps we're going to establish a little brick factory on the moon and build regolith houses. It's like Minecraft in real life. As soon as you find some cool new material, you gotta build a tiny house with it. If successful, these bricks could be used to construct entire buildings, potentially covering inflatable modules or giving new life to abandoned landers. So, will astronauts need to become skilled bricklayers? Well, they won't do everything themselves. We'd have to create a small automated system involving robots working collaboratively. Humans will, of course, oversee the construction site. Despite all this automation, scientists believe that living on the moon is going to be, well, call it cozy. The designs may involve stacked living quarters or multi-purpose areas. However, there would be some challenges too. On the moon, things get extreme. Imagine scorching temperatures that can go up to 212 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, and at night, they plunge down to a chilly minus 290 degrees. And it's not just the weather. The moon gets relentlessly exposed to solar radiation, cosmic rays, and micrometeorite impacts. All these things gradually wear down anything on its surface. Another big challenge is the lunar dust. On the moon, there's no air to breathe, and the dust there can cause problems. And this one isn't only regular dust. It's super clingy and can even make astronauts sneeze and have watery eyes, as if they're having a lunar hay fever. It can also damage equipment and spacesuits. It's not something you want to mess with. Scientists have found that the dust is made when meteors hit the moon, creating tiny particles and sharp glass shards. It's toxic, and its tiny particles can float around in low lunar gravity, making it hard to breathe. Unlike on Earth, the moon doesn't have wind or rain to clean it away. So now they're studying it to find out how to prevent this annoying problem from ruining their entire mission. There's more to this lunar haven than meets the eye. Scientists also want to delve into the mysteries of low-frequency electromagnetic waves there. These waves are whispers from the far reaches of the universe. These elusive signals have remained hidden from us for ages. We only caught some cacophony of radio and other background noise, but that's it. On the moon's dark side, however, we can finally record and study them. Studying these waves will help scientists to unlock the secrets of the universe's origins. It's not just about the Earth or the moon. We're talking about peering back to the very beginnings of our world. Our new lunar lab might help us to forever reshape our understanding of the cosmos. So, NASA has some big plans on the moon now. Their Artemis mission completed a successful return to Earth in December 2022 after nearly a month in space. It ventured far beyond the moon. This mission proved the capabilities of some of our recent technological developments that will help us explore Mars. The goal of Artemis is to establish a lasting presence on the moon. They want to create a gateway, like a space station in orbit around the satellite, to help with the landings. Artemis 2 is set to carry astronauts to lunar orbit in 2024, and during Artemis 3, which should take place in the mid-2020s, 2 astronauts will touch down near the moon's south pole. It's quite possible that the lunar base will be built within the next couple of decades. So, stay tuned.
Soon we might start constructing loads of stuff on the moon. All because India's moon mission has recently detected sulfur near the moon's south pole. This chemical element can come in extremely handy for creating infrastructure on our satellite. It's the first time this chemical element has been discovered on Earth's natural satellite. This sought-after element is mostly found near Earth's volcanoes. Its appearance on the moon speaks volumes about the satellite's volcanic history and its past atmospheric conditions. The mission's rover detected this chemical element less than a week after touching down around 70 degrees from the moon's south pole on the 23rd of August, 2023. This historic landing on the lunar surface made India the 4th country to safely land a mission on the moon. It's also the first spacecraft to touch down so close to the south pole of our satellite. It's an area of strategic importance because it's believed to be home to deposits of water ice. If it turns out to be true, future missions might be able to harvest it and turn this water ice into drinking water or even rocket fuel. For 2 weeks, the lander carried out the data collection, mainly focused on the analysis of the moon's soil and its extremely thin atmosphere. Meanwhile, the solar-powered Progyan rover started its quest to find frozen water on the moon. As for the lander, it demonstrated another amazing feat on the 3rd of September. The spacecraft fired up its engines and lifted itself for about 16 inches into the air. Then it made a tiny hop to land 12 to 16 inches away from its original position. It's kinda a big deal. Being able to get a lander back off the surface of the moon is essentially for future missions, showing that they can safely return soil samples or even astronauts back home after a lunar mission. In September, the Indian spacecraft was put into sleeping mode. The 14-day-long lunar night was approaching, and the spacecraft wasn't designed to collect scientific data during this period of time. So far, we've learned about a few major findings of the mission. One is related to measuring the temperature of the moon's topsoil at different depths. Intriguingly, the surface of the satellite in that region turned out to be hotter than expected. It was believed that the temperature could be between 68 and 86 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface, but it was around 158 degrees Fahrenheit, way hotter than it should be. The other discovery indicates the presence of several chemical elements, including oxygen. Besides, the data received from the spacecraft confirms the presence of aluminum, calcium, iron, titanium, silicon, and other chemical elements on the lunar surface close to the South Pole. The rover also used special instruments designed to measure quakes and rumbles beneath the lunar surface to detect some seismic activity. It brings us back to the sulfur detected thanks to the rover's spectroscope. Scientists are currently working on figuring out whether this element formed on the surface in a natural way or whether it's the result of volcanic activity or a meteor strike. Another astonishing thing found on the moon is a rock, and it may be the oldest known Earth rock. A 0.7-inch wide chip included in a large rock collection brought to our planet by Apollo astronauts might actually be a 4-billion-year-old fragment of Earth. This finding could help us paint a better picture of the intense pounding early Earth got at the dawn of its life. It could go like this. Soon after the rock formed, an asteroid impact might have blasted it from Earth. At that time, our planet's satellite was 3 times closer to Earth than it is today. The collision was so powerful that this chunk of terrestrial rock found its way to the moon. Later, this fragment got engulfed in a lunar breccia, a motley kind of rock. Eventually, the rock was brought back home to Earth by Apollo 14 astronauts. Even though scientists had found meteorites coming from Mars and the moon before, it was the first time a rock from the moon turned out to be a terrestrial meteorite. They also found out that the rock had formed in a water-rich environment at temperatures and pressures corresponding to those at around 12 miles beneath the surface of our planet. In 2019, China's Chang'e 4 mission made history by landing on the far side of the moon. The mission's rover helped researchers visualize structures hidden deep below the surface of the satellite, revealing billions of years of lunar history. The Yutu-2 rover made this discovery with the help of its lunar-penetrating radar. It imaged deep into the moon's surface and listened to echoes of sound bouncing back off structures hidden from view under the surface of the moon. It turned out those structures were resting at depths of almost 1,000 feet. The research suggests that the first 130 feet under the surface are made up of layers of dust, soil, and rocks. The instruments also discovered a concealed crater that must have formed after a large object slammed into the moon's surface. Long, long ago, ancient lava was likely to be flowing deep underground. Researchers believe that the broken rocks around the formation might be debris produced by the impact. They also found that the volcanic rock layers were thinner the closer they were to the surface. Such a thickness variation of lava flows might mean a decrease in the number and magnitude of eruptions over time. So, lunar volcanic activity gradually dwindled since the moon's formation around 4.5 billion years ago. On the far side of the moon, there is one of the largest and oldest impact craters in our solar system, the South Pole Aitken Basin. Unfortunately, from Earth, you can only see its outer rim, which looks like a huge chain of mountains. It's a ginormous 8-mile deep dent, stretching for more than 1,500 miles in diameter and covering 1/4 of the moon's surface. Astronomers are sure that this crater appeared when an asteroid collided with the moon around 4 billion years ago. And now, look at this gigantic chunk of metal the size of 4 states of Connecticut. As for its weight in pounds, it's enough to say that the number contains 18 zeros. This mysterious mass is hidden about 180 miles under the moon's surface, somewhere in the middle of the South Pole Aitken Basin. It was discovered when GRAIL, which stands for NASA's Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory Mission, gathered data about our natural satellite. When examining this information, scientists noticed that in one place on the moon's surface, there was a weird change in gravity. After researching this phenomenon, they concluded that something mysterious was weighing down the basin floor there. So far, researchers haven't figured out the origin of the bizarre lump, but there are several theories. One of them claims that the finding is a chunk of dense oxide, which appeared when the moon was just taking its shape. At that time, the satellite was still covered with ancient oceans of magma, and the lump could be formed at the final stages of its cooling. However, most scientists support another theory, according to which the puzzling mass is part of the giant asteroid that once created the South Pole Aitken Basin. Since the thing is metallic, it's probably the iron-nickel core of the asteroid. There might be a labyrinth of lava tubes on the moon. Not so long ago, astronomers received the results of underground topography and discovered a massive cave under the surface of Earth's satellite. It could be the result of the lunar volcanic activity that happened more than 3 billion years ago. Streams of lava hardened, creating a thick, hard crust on the outside. But inside, it kept flowing, melting the rock and creating tunnels and caves. Numerous small pits in the moon's surface discovered by NASA seem to be the openings to such lava tubes. If this theory is confirmed, the underground tunnels might serve not only as a convenient location for human-crewed space missions, but also as much-needed water sources for astronauts.
So, Mars has several faces. No, really. Back in 1976, when the Viking 1 orbiter was checking out the red planet, it spotted something interesting, a big structure that looked like a human face. It was in the region called Cydonia. It soon became very popular. A bit later, we also discovered the so-called crown face in Libya Montes. Mars in general has a lot of strange structures on it. In 2022, we spotted a door-like structure there. NASA's Curiosity rover snapped some pictures of a rocky mound called East Cliffs on Mount Sharp. This mound has natural cracks in it, and one of them is about the size of a dog door, like something from an ancient Egyptian tomb. A lot of people hyped that story up. The image was shared widely on social media, making the crack look bigger than it really is. Some people think that it's hinting at extraterrestrial life. But after looking closely, NASA found out that it was just a narrow crack in the rocky terrain. These cracks and gaps are pretty normal in rocky areas, both on Earth and Mars. The crack formed naturally over time, maybe from wind erosion or Mars quakes. Mars is a gold mine of mysterious structures. Recently, we found some strange spiral shapes there. These are giant coils made of lava, and they look like big springs or loops. For years, we weren't sure whether Martian valleys were formed by lava or ice. These lava coils are shedding light on that mystery. Now, thanks to high-resolution images from NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, researchers have spotted 269 lava spirals that can't be explained by ice-related activities. What's fascinating is these lava coils are like the ones we see on Earth, like those formed by Hawaiian lava flows. These spirals are so well preserved that they were easily overlooked before. They range from 16 to almost 100 feet wide and are subtle, blending into the dusty Martian landscape. These coils can teach us a lot about Mars's composition, especially its crust and mantle. We still don't know much about those. But Mars isn't the only planet with strange structures on it. For example, Saturn, the gas giant of our solar system, has a fascinating feature at its north pole, a huge hexagon. This is a hexagon-shaped cloud pattern. It's about 9,000 miles long, making it larger than the diameter of Earth. It's thought to be a jet stream made of gases moving very fast, at about 200 miles per hour. This hexagon was first spotted by the Voyager mission in the 80s, and later seen up close by the Cassini mission in 2006. The Cassini mission noticed a change in its color from blue to golden over time. There are different ideas about why Saturn has this thing. One theory suggests it forms because of the way winds move at different speeds near Saturn's poles. Similar shapes were created in lab experiments when liquids were rotated at different speeds. Another idea suggests that a slow-spinning stream of air, along with Saturn's special weather patterns, might be responsible. In 2020, we found that when storms are surrounded by winds swirling in the opposite direction, they can create a steady hexagon shape. So far, this is the most likely explanation. Saturn also got lucky with the bizarre moons. One of them is called Lapidus. This moon has a weird feature, a huge ridge that wraps around its middle like a giant belt. This basically makes it look like a giant walnut. Where's my nutcracker? This ridge is incredibly tall by our standards, around 8 up to 12 miles high and stretching 124 miles wide. It covers more than 3/4 of the moon's surface and is considered the third largest mountain range in the entire solar system. Now, we don't have a clue about how this enormous ridge formed. It's unlike anything seen on other planets or moons. There's one idea, though. The ridge might be the remnants of a dead moon. Let's say billions of years ago, a colossal impact shattered chunks of material off Lapidus. These pieces circled around the moon, forming a mini-moon or sub-satellite. And over time, the gravitational pull of Lapidus tore this mini-moon apart, creating a ring of debris around it. As the debris from this ring fell back onto Lapidus, it built up the massive ridge we see today. They think this process happened quickly, maybe over centuries. Saturn's gravity didn't interfere because, luckily, Lapidus was quite far away from it. If Lapidus was closer to Saturn, its moon might have been pulled away. But we do need more simulations to see if this theory is true. Titan, another one of Saturn's moons, also has some weird stuff going on in its methane seas. Scientists have spotted these strange bright spots called magic islands that seem to pop up and disappear over time. We have no idea what they are. Titan's atmosphere is packed with complex organic molecules that clump together and fall to its surface like snow. These magic islands might be snow clumps that soak up methane and sink very slowly. But there's a problem. In water, molecules stick together, which is why stuff can float on top of it. But methane is different. It likes to grab onto other molecules, so it makes any solid thing sink immediately. Yet, these magic islands don't sink. There's a theory that these islands might be like sponges made of ice with lots of holes. When pieces of this holy ice come loose from the edge of the lake, they can float on Titan's seas for a bit before going down under. There are also other ideas, like bubbles of nitrogen gas or waves caused by wind. We need more research to know for sure. Moons like to be weird. Just look at our own one. In 1971, we found a patch with missing soil on our moon, and it looks like a blue lake. They call this mysterious spot Ina. We first spotted it during the Apollo 15 mission in 1971. Later, the Apollo 17 mission took clearer pictures of it. This spot, shaped like a bluish D letter, is one of the weirdest things on the moon. The color comes from special rocks rich in titanium called basalts. These rocks cover Ina's floor and make it look blue. There are also bluish areas near the edges of the mounds inside Ina. Ina is unique and probably has a long history. It might have had volcanic activity, with mounds that are about 3.5 billion years old. It's similar to the surface age of the volcanic field that surrounds Ina. Now, our moon has its own face, just like those on Mars. There's an area near the moon's south pole that looks like a face, but it's just a bunch of craters and shadows that happen to make an image resembling a face when seen from far away. These craters have been there for billions of years and cover about 16% of the moon's surface. Some of these craters might even have water and ice inside of them. You might be wondering why there are so many faces in our solar system. Well, that's because our brains are wired to recognize faces, even when there aren't any. It's a phenomenon called pareidolia. Our brains try to make sense of shapes, so when we see something that looks a bit like a human, our brain turns it into one because it's familiar. Like when you see a shadow figure on a chair with clothes, or even on Mercury. Some people see shapes like Mickey Mouse. So don't worry, it's not extraterrestrial life. It's our brains that play tricks on us, making us see familiar shapes like faces even where they don't really exist. Now, don't get all upset, but the moon is shrinking and getting wrinkled, pretty much like a grape turning into a raisin. That happens because our natural satellite has been retaining its inner heat for over 4 billion years, but its core is gradually cooling down and becoming more dense, like me. Unlike a grape's flexible skin, the moon's surface is pretty brittle. This brittleness causes faults to form where different sections of the crust push up against each other, leading to what scientists call moonquakes. So far, our satellite has shrunk by around 150 feet in circumference. It's such a tiny change that it won't affect the look of eclipses or the phases of the moon. Even tidal cycles won't be affected since the moon's mass hasn't really changed. The shrinking process won't directly affect us down here, but that doesn't mean that all humans are safe. Moonquakes, caused by the shrinking process, have been a concern for years. During the famous Apollo missions, NASA astronauts left seismometers at different points on the moon. Those are devices capable of identifying seismic activity on the lunar surface with exceptional precision. The equipment was operational for several years, and it managed to capture over 12,000 moonquakes, ranging in magnitudes from 2 to 5. Up until 1977, the team was able to identify 4 distinct types of quakes. Some tremors, like those caused by meteorite impacts, were relatively easy to identify. But the cause of the so-called shallow moonquakes remains a mystery to scientists, and that can be an obstacle to future missions on lunar soil. As the name suggests, shallow moonquakes occur relatively close to the surface, typically between 30 to 135 miles beneath the surface. Recent research suggests that these tremors are triggered by the compression of the moon's surface, leading to the formation of thrust faults, where one surface layer is pushed up over another. This study also discovered where the epicenters of the strongest ones were. It all started in the South Pole region, precisely where we want to settle down. Interest in the lunar South Pole peaked in 2023, when India's Chandrayaan mission successfully landed and deployed a rover to explore the area. NASA also has plans for the same spot. And their ambitious goal is to take astronauts there for the very first time. The Artemis 3 mission, scheduled for 2026, currently has 13 potential landing spots at the South Pole, represented by the blue squares here. One of the options is situated within a geological feature called De Gerlach Rim 2, which is a strategic area for exploration. It might have ice, because parts of it are completely in the dark, but it's close enough to areas that do have sunlight, which is crucial as a source of power. Now, take a look at the pink dots on that same map. They represent possible epicenters of the strongest moonquakes recorded by the Apollo missions. That means that thrust faults in the area could be relatively young and potentially active, representing a real danger to the Artemis 3 crew. These astronauts will journey to lunar orbit over the course of 30 days, and 2 crew members will descend to the surface, spending about a week at the South Pole. Their moonwalk will be particularly challenging given the extreme temperatures of these permanently shadowed regions. The presence of moonquakes and possible landslides only adds more danger to this mission, as this phenomenon is far more frightening than earthquakes. The strongest moonquake ever recorded had a magnitude of 5.7. You might think that's not a big deal, considering that countries like Chile, Colombia, and Papua New Guinea experienced earthquakes of similar magnitude in 2023 without significant damage. But the gravitational pull on the Moon is relatively weaker than on Earth, so what feels like a gentle tremor on our planet might be a real ground-shaking event up there. This happens because you're not as firmly connected to the surface of the Moon as you are on Earth, meaning that seismic waves can cause the surface to move more freely. There's also a huge difference in duration. Earthquakes typically last between 10 and 30 seconds, with some lasting up to 2 minutes. A moonquake can persist much longer than that. Our satellite is essentially a solid, rigid, and dry sphere. So when a tremor shakes the Moon's surface, it resonates powerfully without any natural means of dissipation. Moonquakes can last for a good 10 minutes or even longer, with little tremors sticking around for hours afterwards. Now, these new findings about shallow moonquakes won't actually change the potential landing sites for Artemis 3, and they won't affect the duration of the mission either. That's because accurately estimating how often a specific region experiences these tremors is tricky and unpredictable. What scientists do know is that these shallow quakes aren't very common and pose a low risk to short-term missions on the lunar surface. But that situation changes completely if we consider long-term habitation on the Moon, and that could happen sooner than we expect. The Artemis 3 mission represents an important first step towards space colonization. China is also making the first moves to establish a permanent lunar base at the South Pole by 2040. Their strategy involves utilizing 3D printing and brick production from lunar soil for constructing the moon base. That definitely sounds fascinating, but putting together a setup like that comes with a bunch of challenges, including dealing with intense cosmic radiation, the lack of water, and of course, long-lasting moonquakes. Over billions of years, the surface of the Moon has been hit by asteroids and comets, causing bits and pieces to constantly break off from the impacts. Because of this, all the surface material is pretty loosely packed. So, when there are quakes, slopes in the same area can become susceptible to landslides or new faults opening up. Future settlements located too close to these unstable slopes could put everyone living inside these lunar bases at risk. Moon dust adds another layer of complexity because, without erosion or water to smooth it out, it can harden to the point of being as tough as glass. If we really want to understand how dangerous moonquakes might be for people living and working on the Moon in the future, space agencies still need to map out and get new seismic data, and not just from the South Pole, but from the entire satellite. In 2025, the Farside Seismic Sweep Mission, or FSS, plans to deploy 2 of the most high-precision seismometers ever built to the Schrödinger crater, which is located on the dark side of the Moon. Finding out what's happening on the ground there is crucial for understanding the complex lunar structure and its internal dynamics. Scientists are still trying to figure out whether the lack of recorded seismic activity on the far side of the Moon is due to current instruments not being capable of detecting it, or if it's due to some kind of interference from melted material in the mantle. Once they have this answer, it will be easier to fully understand the phenomenon of shallow moonquakes and assess their implications for future neighborhoods on our natural satellite. Now, you may have heard that Earth is also shrinking, but it's a different process. Basically, the Moon is getting smaller mainly because its core is cooling down naturally. The Earth's core is cooling too, but our planet got its crust with tectonic plates, unlike the Moon, which only has one plate. So the energy from Earth's core shifts those plates around or comes through volcanic eruptions. Earth is actually losing mass overall due to atmospheric loss. Our planet loses about 100 million pounds of mass per year, mostly from a leaky atmosphere. Earth's gravity isn't strong enough to retain the lightest particles, like hydrogen and helium, which escape into space. But don't worry, these numbers aren't cause for alarm, considering that our planet's atmosphere weighs about 5 quadrillion tons, a number I can't even imagine. So, in other words, it would take many, many, many times the current age of the universe for it to completely evaporate. Well, that makes me breathe easier. How about you?
People haven't set foot on the moon in several decades, but the situation is going to change soon. NASA's Artemis program is going to send a few missions to Earth's natural satellite. The first astronauts might step on the surface of the moon already in 2025, as part of Artemis 3, if the current schedule holds, that is. And then the next stage will start, and it will be an even more ambitious project than sending humans to the moon again. NASA wants to construct a base camp at our satellite's south pole. Such an outpost will help the Artemis mission to break the previous record for the longest stay on the moon. So far, it's 74 hours, 59 minutes, and 38 seconds. Plus, such a camp can serve as a jumping-off point for missions setting off for deep space. According to NASA, at first it's going to be a small camp, accommodating missions for a week or two. But soon, it'll grow in size and complexity and will be able to sustain crews for a couple of months at a time. There might also be an open-top rover similar to the one used in the Apollo missions and an RV. These options can provide mobility for astronauts while they live and work at the camp. With each new trip, the level of comfort of space explorers will increase. Specialists are now developing the technologies that will help people to work more easily on the moon, far away from home. There's also hope that building such a camp can help us prepare for an even more challenging step: human exploration of Mars. For the camp to function properly, it's very important to be able to find and extract resources from the satellite's rocks and dust. These resources can include water ice, metals, oxygen, and even some building materials. It'll help to lighten the load with supplies delivered to the moon. It can also potentially allow astronauts to remain there for longer periods of time. Now, why the lunar South Pole? There are two very important reasons. First, building the base camp there will allow astronauts to have periods of continuous light from the sun. The moon is tilted in such a way that its south pole experiences up to 2 months of continuous light every year, when the sun is circling above the horizon all the time. And all this abundant sunlight can provide the camp with a lot of solar power. At the moment, NASA is trying to design a solar array that could stay more than 30 feet in the air. This way, it'll be able to make the most of the available sunlight. The second reason for choosing this location is deep craters that have been shrouded in darkness for billions of years, also because of the moon's peculiar tilt. Some of these craters haven't seen sunlight since the time of their formation. They're also known as permanently shadowed regions, and that's where scientists have found evidence of water ice. If we manage to access this frozen water and it turns out there's a lot of it there, it'll be hugely valuable for the inhabitants of the base camp. Plus, it might supply flights back to Earth, or further on to Mars. We don't know yet whether there's a lot of water in that region or whether it's free of contaminants, but NASA is going to find out. One of the ways to do it is to use Viper. This mobile robot is likely to arrive at the lunar South Pole in 2024. The Lunar Terrain Vehicle, or LTV for short, is scheduled to arrive on a mission in 2025. Astronauts will be able to operate it remotely, and it's likely to be able to avoid such hazards as rocks and craters on its own. Astronauts will then explore their surroundings either from the safety of the lander on earlier missions or later on from the base camp itself. Plus, NASA will use the LTV to conduct scientific or mission-related work even during periods of time when there will be no humans on the moon. The vehicle will play a crucial role in searching for water ice and other resources. But even though the LTV's remote-controlled capabilities are quite innovative, its design isn't going to change much. It'll look almost like the rovers that have come before it. If astronauts decide to drive the vehicle with its top open, they will have to put on their spacesuits, and that's not very comfortable. Donning such a suit can easily take hours. Plus, the duration of missions always depends on how much oxygen each astronaut's spacesuit has left. That's where NASA's RV-like concept, known as the Habitable Mobility Platform, comes into play. If this project succeeds, the RV will have a pressurized interior and life support systems, meaning passengers will be able to have a ride without their spacesuits on. This will definitely make life easier for astronauts. The final design of the vehicle isn't ready yet, but the main goal is to allow several people to live and work inside the vehicle for up to 2 weeks. Now let's have a look at what the future lunar cabin might look like. Its design hasn't been finalized either, but NASA is looking at modular and inflatable structures. It may help to create larger spaces for crews to live in. Plus, such kinds of structures are more compact and lightweight, so it will be easier to transport them to the moon. But there's one more intriguing possibility. How about a large-scale 3D printer that will use lunar soil and rock as its raw material? Such a machine might be able to produce bricks and other shapes, assembling dwellings from scratch. A prototype 3D printer is now building a test structure in Houston. Also, the first towns on the moon could probably be built in craters. They might be covered with protective materials like plastic, reinforced with a net made of titanium and UV-resistant superfiber. The inhabitants would have to access their homes through airlock entrances dug into a mound. Bilbo Baggins would surely appreciate their aesthetics. On the moon, gravity is way weaker than on our home planet. And while it can make it easier for astronauts to walk and even run on the moon's surface, it's not so great in the long run. That's why inside the lunar base, there might be an artificial gravitational field. Without it, people would have problems with coordination, balance, and orientation in space. Plus, weight-bearing bones would lose 1 to 5% of mineral density per month. A geologist from the University of Notre Dame, who's been studying samples of lunar soil, says that rocks or dust may have a key role in protecting astronauts from radiation coming from solar flares and cosmic rays. On Earth, the planet's atmosphere and its magnetic field filter out most of this harmful radiation. But the moon doesn't have the same shield because there's no atmosphere like on our planet there. The very weak one that our natural satellite has is made up of some unusual gases that haven't been found in the atmosphere of Earth, Mars, or Venus. That's why people working there will need extra protection. The experts say that up to 6 feet of lunar material might be needed to shield astronauts from the radiation. But besides building materials and water, there's another crucial resource on the moon, and it's oxygen. NASA hopes to start extracting this gas from moon rocks. They also hope to find metals like aluminum. This could allow astronauts to live off the land, and the base would become much more self-sufficient than expected. It could turn into a resupply station for spaceships heading for Mars. But a colony on Mars would cost us trillions of dollars to construct and inhabit. It would take a long time for even one cargo ship to reach the red planet. Lunar camps are much easier to build and maintain. There will likely be direct spaceship routes connecting the satellite with Earth. And people will need just 3 days to travel between these 2 points. That's one of the reasons the colonies on the moon will be growing, developing, and changing non-stop. How about playing golf? Not on Earth, but on the moon. Let's journey back to a time 50 years ago when one astronaut turned the lunar surface into the most unusual golf course ever. Any golfer will tell you how tricky it is to avoid sand traps, but picture Alan Shepard, a NASA astronaut dealing with an entire surface that feels like super fine powder. During the Apollo 14 mission, he took a break to showcase some spacey golf skills for everyone watching from Earth. After his first shot, he excitedly made another. For him, it seemed the ball went forever and ever. Let's dial back to reality for a moment. Thanks to the research by the United States Golf Association, or USGA, we've got some numbers. They found that Alan's first moon ball traveled 24 yards, and his second stretched for 40 yards. Now, how does that compare to the average golf shots back here? In regular gravity, one usually swings to about 216 yards. Just goes to show, while we've upgraded our golf game on Earth with tech and training, the moon's low-gravity playground is a different environment altogether. Now let's give Alan some props. Moon golf? Not as simple as you might think. His club wasn't one from your local sports store. It was a makeshift one. A moon sample collector with a club head stuck to it. Add to that the bulky spacesuit he had on. Imagine trying to swing wearing an outfit that's as stiff as cardboard. With all that gear, Alan could only muster a one-handed swing. Care to have a similar experience? Well, you might not be able to play golf on the moon anytime soon, but you can give it a shot underwater. Some say the conditions are similar. Here's where it gets even more interesting. The USGA didn't just take Alan's word on where the balls landed. They wanted to investigate. For starters, they used ultra-clear footage of the Apollo 14 mission. They also used some sharp images from NASA's special moon camera, launched in 2009. Using this imagery, they mapped out the journey of those two golf balls. Alan loved his unique golf club so much, he wanted to bring it back home. No big deal, right? Well, you see, in those days, astronauts would leave behind unnecessary items to make space for moon rocks. But not this club. So during the 70s, this interstellar golf club found a new home at the USGA Museum in New Jersey. Unlike regular golf clubs, this one had a twist. It was crafted from aluminum and Teflon. It was built to fold and fit snugly within the tight spaces of the lunar lander. How did this whole moon golf idea even pop up? Well, in 1970, golf legend Bob Hope paid a visit to NASA. Inspired by Hope's love for golf, an idea came into Shepard's head: moon golf. To turn his dream into reality, he collaborated with a golf professional and NASA's tech specialists. Together, they crafted a club that met NASA's strict safety norms. But hey, Alan didn't want this to be just a surprise stunt. Remember, traveling to the moon required very strict protocols. They couldn't just randomly have a picnic up there, you know? So, Alan made sure NASA officials agreed with this impromptu game of golf. They were initially skeptical, but eventually gave the green light after Alan passionately laid out his plan. He also promised he'd start playing if everything went smoothly on the mission. Determined to make it perfect, Alan prepped like a champ. The story goes that he'd put on his hefty spacesuit and sneak off to secret spots so he could practice. Decades later, he'd still be reflecting on his lunar escapade. He was the only golfer to ever swing on the moon. It's not just golf balls that astronauts left behind on their trips. There were actually a lot of objects left on the moon between 1969 and 1972, the year of the last moon landing. Each time you gaze up at the moon, remember that there's a cute family photo up there, some huge science gadgets, a small statue, a bunch of, well, human waste bags, and yes, some American flags. Years have passed by, and yes, technically those items are still hanging out there, though they've probably seen better days because of the harsh conditions on the moon. Some items had a special place in the astronauts' hearts and were meant to stay on the moon. But hey, leaving some stuff behind also meant they could bring back moon samples. You know the feeling. It's like when you need to make room in your suitcase for souvenirs when you're finishing a vacation. Does NASA have a complete list of things they left on the moon? Well, not really. In fact, one team tried to create a record of some of the items and reached an amazing list of 106 left there from the Apollo 11 mission alone. And that's not counting Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin's famous footprints. The largest items at each landing site were mostly the sciencey stuff, like pieces of their lunar module and experiments to study the moon in depth. Then there were some beautiful tokens, like Apollo 11's plaque and a special disc with messages from leaders around the world. Some say the astronauts also took medals to remember some heroic cosmonauts, and they even left a gold olive branch, an age-old symbol of peace. Now, later moon missions had a little more fun, like Alan Shepard did with his golf game. But the award for the most heartwarming moment goes to Charlie Duke. During the Apollo 16 mission, he left a picture of his family up there. It's like he wanted them to be a part of the adventure. Although, a heads up, those photos probably didn't age well because of the moon's high exposure to the sun's radiation. there might just be an art museum up there on our satellite too. Let me explain. There's this tiny little art piece called the Moon Museum. It's a ceramic chip about the size of your nail, and it was crafted by an artist named Forrest Myers. This tiny object showcases miniature artworks from 6 talented people. Among them are even the famous Andy Warhol, the same artist known for his iconic soup cans and celebrity portraits. Forrest Myers said he wanted his mini museum to be on the moon, but there was a problem. NASA officials weren't exactly on board with the idea. However, Myers shared with the press that he handed over this art chip to an engineer working on the Apollo 12 mission. According to Myers, this engineer secretly tucked the Moon Museum onto a leg of the lunar lander. In case you haven't figured it out yet, these lunar landers don't come back to Earth after their mission. Take this with a grain of salt though, as NASA has never confirmed this story. You might wonder, why did they leave all these things? Sometimes it was about making a statement. Other times, it was purely practical. At one point, it was mentioned that during the Apollo 11 mission, for example, a decision needed to be made. The astronauts had to quickly figure out what was essential for their trip back home. They ended up creating a cleanup spot, tossing away things they didn't need anymore. Leaving things behind on the moon isn't that different from how we leave things behind on Earth. Just like archaeologists study our ancient leftovers to learn about our ancestors. The stuff on the moon gives us insights about those incredible lunar missions. Some things they left had done their job, like the pole for the flag or the camera they used to broadcast those steps on the moon. Even the tools astronauts used to collect samples were left because they had more precious cargo to bring back – moon rocks. When it comes to the current state of all these items, scientists are not entirely sure. We do know that NASA's Moon Observer has spotted some of their shadows. They're still up there. The official gear was built to resist, so it might behave a bit better. But those personal items? They've probably seen better days.
Now look at this fancy granite kitchen countertop. This one can also be available on the moon. I mean, there's no production whatsoever as of now, but there's enough raw materials for the kitchen of your dreams. And by the way, granite on the moon can even prove this dark horse had plenty of water at some point. So it all started when scientists found this weird blob of heat on the far side of the moon. It's all because of a massive chunk of granite that's buried underground. Apparently granite is pretty rare outside of Earth, so this is a big deal. According to the researchers, there's this old volcano on the moon that hasn't erupted in like 3.5 billion years. But it turns out it's still giving off some serious radiation. The scientists used a fancy new method with microwaves to measure the temperature below the moon's surface. They found this area that's about 31 miles across, where it's like 18 degrees warmer than the rest of the place. And it's right under a spot that collapsed and is full of silicon. It's not as thriving as Silicon Valley back on Earth, it's just a volcanic crater, but without all the lava spewing out. The scientists even compared it to those granite rocks you see in Yosemite, like El Capitan and Half Dome. You know, those giant rocks that look super majestic? Well, apparently they're made of the same stuff. Researchers claim that granite is super common on Earth, but not anywhere else in our solar system. So this could change everything we know about other rocky planets. Right, now we know there's granite on the moon, but why is that important to us? So, you know how granite forms on Earth? It's all thanks to water and plate tectonics teaming up to create these huge blobs of melted rock beneath the surface. But guess what? The moon doesn't have any of that action going on, which makes granite super rare up there. But this discovery could give us some clues about what the moon was like back in the day when it had volcanic activity. Without water, making granite becomes a real challenge. But somehow, someway, they found granite on the moon. No water, no plate tectonics, but still, we got granite. So what does that mean? Did the moon have water in this one spot? Or was it just ridiculously hot? I guess we'll need to give a tad more time for the scientists to figure it out. The water on the moon is an issue, though. Duh. As of now, the moon is bigger than the Sahara Desert, but somehow 100 times drier. Astronomers have been debating for ages whether there's any water on this celestial neighbor of ours. But in 2020, NASA's SOFIA mission finally confirmed that there is indeed water on the sunlit part of the lunar surface. Turns out those grains of lunar dust have little molecules of H2O hanging out on them. Back in 1645, when people first started gazing at the moon, they were fascinated by these dark spots all over its surface. Dutch astronomer Michael van Lengren even made a map and called these spots Maria, which means seas in Latin. Sorry, Michael, they're just actually plains of basalt from ancient volcanic eruptions, but we still use the term Maria today. In 1892, an American astronomer named William Pickering discovered that the moon has practically no atmosphere. No clouds, no atmosphere, no chance for water to stick around. So scientists started thinking that the moon was as dry as a desert. But then, in the 1960s, a theoretical physicist named Kenneth Watson came along with an idea. He suggested that water ice could actually exist in the shadowy craters of the moon that never see sunlight. These areas are called permanently shadowed regions. It was a mind-blowing concept at the time. The Apollo missions from 1969 to 1972 finally gave us the chance to look for water on the moon up close and personal. But when the astronauts brought back soil samples, there was no sign of water. So everyone went back to thinking the moon was bone dry. However, in 1994, NASA's Clementine mission suggested that there might be ice in these shadowed craters after all. And in 1998, the Lunar Prospector mission found evidence of hydrogen concentrations in the permanently shadowed areas. This was a strong indication of water ice at the lunar poles. The images weren't super clear, but it was still an exciting discovery. And finally, in 2008, scientists decided to take another look at those Apollo samples. They revisited the old data and found some hints that there might be water after all. It was like finding buried treasure in your own backyard. As you can see, the moon is a pretty promising destination. It even has enough stuff to produce your food supplements – calcium, magnesium, you name it. Just kidding, it's not the best idea to munch on them to boost your diet. But there are a bunch of other applications they can be used for. Calcium is like the fourth most popular element hanging out in the lunar highlands. But here's the cool part. Pure calcium metal is actually super flexible and can conduct electricity like a boss when there's no oxygen around. Who knew, right? Anorthite is a rare gem here on Earth, but up on the moon, it's partly central for calcium. It can even help make those groovy silicon-based solar cells. To make them, you need some lunar silicon, iron, titanium oxide, and of course, our buddy calcium and aluminum. It's like a recipe for solar success up there in space. The moon even has precious metals like gold. In 2009, NASA was on a lunar mission and they found some gold in the lunar soil. They had a spacecraft right behind the rocket, equipped with a fancy spectrometer. Its job was to study all the debris that got released when the rocket crashed. And they found all sorts of chemicals, like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, ammonia, sodium, hydrogen, and even a little bit of mercury, gold, and silver. Hey, vampires beware. Now I know it's been quite a while since then, like 14 years to be exact, but measuring how much gold is actually there has been a real challenge. You see, it's hiding deep beneath the lunar regolith, making it tricky to get an accurate count. Yeah, metals are fun and lunar water may have existed, but what about food? Good news, everyone! Scientists are saying that plants can actually grow on the moon, but don't expect a luscious orchard. It'll be more like a moderate garden with just a couple of beds. Here's the scoop. A while back, those awesome Apollo astronauts collected samples of lunar surface material called regolith and brought them back to Earth. Fast forward 50 years, and NASA decided to use 3 of those samples to try growing plants for the very first time. They used dirt from under the lunar rover bumper to grow these plants. The team added water and seeds to the samples, giving each plant a gram of regolith. Then they placed them in a clean room and added nutrient solutions every day. And they succeeded. During that challenge, the brilliant minds dealt with small plants like mustard greens in the nutrient-poor lunar soil. Yeah, we'll have to export olive oil from Earth to dress it. So, plants can indeed grow in the moon's soil. However, they won't be as strong and healthy as the ones grown on good old Earth soil, or even the ones in the control group grown in a lunar simulant made of volcanic ash. But hey, it's just a start. We're still to find out if our dear moon is hiding more treasures. Consider now
Enceladus,
Saturn's icy moon, one of the most promising places to look for life outside Earth. Scientists have just detected the last one of the 6 necessary ingredients for its formation: phosphorus. This rarest element has been discovered in an ocean on Enceladus. This rare element helps make the soil fertile on Earth. But the concentration of this mineral in the hidden seas on the distant moon might be from 100 to 1,000 times greater than in the oceans of our home planet. It might be because
Enceladus,
ocean is rich in carbonates, just like soda water, and this soda water is likely to dissolve the phosphates in the moon's rocks. The new discovery also suggests that on other icy moons of Saturn, like Titan, the waters may be loaded with phosphorus too. Why are scientists so excited about this mineral? Well, phosphates, which are compounds that contain phosphorus, are crucial components of life on Earth. DNA, RNA, and cell membranes contain them. But among those 6 elements required for life, which are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, phosphorus is the least common. In 2004, the Cassini space probe entered the dust from the second outermost ring of Saturn, called the E-ring. It's made up of ice grains Enceladus ejects. And while studying these ice grains examined by Cassini's cosmic dust analyzer, researchers have detected phosphorus.
Enceladus
Is the 6th largest moon of Saturn. It's not really large, only 314 miles across. This makes the space body small enough to fit inside Arizona. We should try that sometime. Interestingly, when the Cassini space probe first arrived at Saturn, astronomers thought that
Enceladus
was going to be a frozen ball of ice. But then, surprise, surprise, they spotted plumes of icy particles and water vapor erupting from geysers on the moon's surface. It became clear that there was a global ocean between the moon's rocky core and its icy shell. The same researchers previously discovered that Saturn's moon might be home to complex organic molecules, too. Before, scientists thought phosphates could be trapped within the rocky cores of
Enceladus
and similar worlds. That's why the newest works, which hint that phosphates might also be abundant in the ocean, came as a surprise. Researchers examined 305 ice grains from Saturn's E-ring and found out that 9 of them contain phosphates. And these results were clear and unmistakable. And it's very important because some time ago, phosphine, a compound of hydrogen and phosphorus, was believed to exist in the clouds of Venus. But no one has managed to find any evidence to support this theory. On
Enceladus
there's no controversy, and phosphates do exist there. Astronomers consider Europa one of the most promising places in the solar system to search for new life forms. All because this moon has a huge saltwater ocean with a depth of 40 to 100 miles. Yes, it is hidden under a layer of ice that is estimated to be from 10 to 20 miles thick. But it is still potentially habitable. Astronomers claim that plumes of water erupt from cracks in the ice shell and release the contents of the moon's ocean into space. Of course, it's going to be challenging for any life-seeking mission to access such a deep environment. On the bright side, as we are, scientists already have some evidence that there are way shallower pools that probably lie much closer to the surface of the moon. They might be located even less than 1 mile under the ice. And there are 2 great things about this news. First of all, it boosts the odds of life existing on Europa. And secondly, if it's true, it can make it easier for future missions to find these life forms, if there are any. Then we've got Titan, Saturn's largest moon. It's smaller and has lighter gravity than Earth, but it still reminds us of our planet. Like on Earth, nitrogen dominates its atmosphere. Titan is the only other world in our solar system with lakes and rivers. These water bodies are made of hydrocarbons, methane, and ethane. There's also a subsurface ocean of water, but it's located very deep down, and no one has figured out yet if this ocean makes contact with anything under the surface. If it does, it could provide fuel for life after mixing with complex chemistry on the surface. But
Enceladus,
and the other icy moons aren't the only place in the solar system that might host or once hosted life. In 2003, Mars Express, a spacecraft launched by the European Space Agency, discovered methane in the atmosphere of Mars. On our planet, the biggest part of this gas in the atmosphere is produced by living creatures, for example, by cattle digesting food and emitting, gas. However, scientists think that methane was stable in the Martian atmosphere for about 300 years. And then, in 2006, the methane almost entirely vanished from the red planet. And it happened 600 times faster than the researchers' model accounted for. The question? What or who generated the gas, and where did it go? Another Martian mystery is microbes that might be sleeping beneath the surface of Mars. There, they might have been protected from the harsh radiation coming from space for millions of years. Scientists simulated the conditions on Mars in a lab to check if it could possibly be true. And they were amazed to find out that bacteria could easily survive in such conditions for 280 million years. Ooh, that's a long shelf life. This means that if life existed on Mars, we could find the evidence in the planet's subsurface by drilling into the Martian soil. Right now, there is no flowing water on Mars, and cells or spores would simply dry out. Plus, the frozen temperature is similar to that of dry ice. In other words, it's deeply frozen. Let it go. And still, there could be 6 types of bacteria and fungi living underground on the red planet. The most likely of them is nicknamed Conan the Bacterium due to its tough nature. Well, I guess time will show. Anyway, if we don't find life outside Earth in our solar system, we could probably look for it on exoplanets, which is what planets outside our star system are called. Some of them look very promising. The closest to Earth exoplanet is Proxima Centauri b. It's a mere 4.2 light-years away from Earth. Recently, astronomers have found out that this world might resemble Earth even more than they previously thought. It's just 17% more massive than our home planet. It orbits a star that is dimmer and less massive than the Sun. Proxima Centauri b is in the middle of the star's habitable zone. This means that the chances of liquid water and life might exist on the planet. It looks like the exoplanet is tidally locked with its parent star. One of its sides faces the star at all times, and the other is always in the darkness. Scientists haven't figured out yet whether the planet has an atmosphere, is traveling too close to its star, and completes one orbit within 11 Earth days. The radiation from the star might be pulling the planet's air away. If this is the case, Proxima Centauri b isn't likely to have liquid water on its surface. Gliese 832c is 16.2 light-years away from Earth. In the cosmic scheme of things, it's a stone's throw away. This exoplanet is 5 times as massive as Earth and travels much closer to its parent star. That's why a year on this planet lasts a mere 36 days. But since this star is a red dwarf, much cooler and dimmer than the Sun, Gliese 832c gets as much light and heat as our planet. At the same time, it's still unclear if it's similar to Earth. The planet probably has a much thicker atmosphere that creates a runaway greenhouse effect. This phenomenon occurs when a planet absorbs more heat from its host star than it can release back into space. This means that Gliese 832c is more likely to resemble scorching hot Venus rather than the relatively cool Earth. Hey, I'm cool with that.